On today's episode of Today in World War II, November 30th, the Soviet Union invades Finland. A German armed merchant cruiser raider shows chivalry to some of its female victims. The SS and local collaborators massacred 25,000 Jews in Latvia. The Brits tighten the vice against Rommel in North Africa, and a naval battle takes place off of Guadalcanal, and it doesn't go the American way. Let's get started. All right, so today in November 30th, 1939, the Soviet Union officially invaded Finland. If you know from previous videos I did a few days ago, the Soviet Union had notified Finland that they were tearing up the mutual non-aggression pact that had been signed previously between the two countries. And on today's date at 8 o'clock in the morning, 21 Soviet divisions crossed the border, and this started what became known as the Winter War between the Soviet Union and Finland. I have done a lot of research on this, and there's a lot of, mostly from Russian sources, but a lot of people saying, well, the Soviets really didn't want to conquer Finland completely. They did. Okay, there's enough evidence out there that shows battle plans that they had pincer movements coming from from St. Petersburg to the Karelian Peninsula, sweeping into Helsinki. Attacks coming from the middle, to cut off Finland in the middle, and to take out the Arctic port of Petsamo. So they had every intention of invading and fully conquering Finland. Um, but they did not count on the fact that the Finns would fight, and they would fight well, and they knew how to use their territory and the water, the lakes, and the fact that let's face it, the Russians weren't that great either at this time. And in fact, and I think a lot of people give credit to the failure of the Soviet army against the Finns. I mean, they didn't fail. They didn't win. They didn't lose. It was they got some territory out of it, and it was an uneasy armistice after that. Of course, they would continue the war after the Germans came in 41. But at this period of time, the Russians were thinking it was going to be a pretty darn easy walkover. And so on today's date, that's when it started. We'll talk more about this in the coming days and coming videos, but it was definitely not easy. Finns knew how to fight. Okay. So if you don't mind, I'm going to make a personal request here. Please subscribe to my channel and click on the bell that you'll be notified when something drops. Okay. Because, if you're here, it means you like World War II. Well, I'm giving you updates every single day on what happened on that date in World War II from 39 to 45. And it's good stuff. It's really good stuff. With all due modesty, it's good stuff. So you want to make sure that you get access to this and notified every single time I drop a new video. Okay, so on November 30th, 1940, there was a German raider disguised as a merchant vessel, an armed merchant vessel, basically. And the Germans had sent these things out since the start of the war in 1939. Well, in this case, this merchant vessel was operating in the Indian Ocean, and it came upon a British ship called the Port Wellington, and it attacked at night. And during the attack, two people were injured, or excuse me, killed, and 87 were captured in general. Now, because they attacked at night, let's put it this way: some of the passengers of the Port Wellington were female, and they were in their bunks sleeping. They were in nightgowns, and they were, obviously when they were taken prisoner by the Penguin, the German armed merchant cruiser name was Penguin. The first officer saw that some of the women were shivering in their nightgowns, and so he decided that he was going to be very chivalrous, and so he personally returned to the burning Port Wellington, and he retrieved clothes for the women, which I guess was okay. So he was a good Nazi, right? You know, I guess. This was still early in the war. it was as it got deeper in the war, both sides got pretty much brutal, but it was always the Germans who led the way in brutality of this war. So, but good for this XO to get in there and take care of the women captives. It was certainly very nice of him to do that. What would be really nice of you is if you would like and comment on this video. As I've told you many times in my previous videos, it's all about engagement. I want to get this channel out to as many people as possible. The best way to do that organically is to have my viewers like the videos and comment on them. And if you could do that for me, I would really appreciate it. All right, on a very sad note, on November 30th, 1941, the Rumbula massacre took place. This took place in the forest outside of Riga, Latvia. Latvia is one of the Baltic countries, near St. Petersburg, southwest of St. Petersburg. And there was about 25,000 Jews were murdered. Most of them were local Latvian Jews. There had been about 1,000 German Jews that had been shipped from Germany, and it was the very infamous SS Einsatzgruppen that were charged to follow the German Wehrmacht. And after the Wehrmacht had liberated or not liberated, but conquered territory, then the SS would send in these Einsatzgruppen, and then they would take care of the cleansing of these areas from Jews and gypsies and communists and whoever the Nazis thought were either subhuman or a threat to their regime. In this case, they were focusing on the Jews. What is especially repugnant about this is the fact that in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine, White Russia, the Baltics, there generally were enthusiastic collaboration from the local population to help with the massacre of the Jews. The locals would then expropriate their property and enrich themselves, on the dead bodies of innocent people. And that's certainly what happened here as well. So the Germans got a lot of help from locals and Poland too. I forgot to mention Poland. There was a time in Poland where, you could sell a Polish Jew and get the equivalent of maybe a couple bucks, max, even less than that. That's just how the total disregard and this anti-Semitism is so high and it continues to be very high in Eastern Europe. I've been a witness of that for 20 plus years. So, very tragic event that happened today. So let's move on to the next event that happened on November 30th, in this case, 1941. If just to set the scene here a little bit, Rommel was pushing the British forces and Commonwealth forces back into Egypt, and we were getting down to brass tacks here about whether they were going to break through and take the Suez Canal or not. Uh, the the island of Malta, located between Libya and Sicily, was a continual bone in the throat of the Germans and the Italians, because as long as it resisted, as long as it had airplanes, as long as it had subs, then it could, if not completely cut off supplies, it could definitely limit the amount of fuel and ammunition and food that was being sent from Southern Europe, from Italy, for the troops to maintain and help the troops win. And in this case, aircraft from Malta, they sank an Italian ship and severely damaged another one that was on these ships were on their way to supply Rommel, and especially the fuel. Rommel was continually beset with lack of fuel for his offenses because if you, as you know, he was very mobile. He loved to flank the British. He'd flank them at every turn. It's desert warfare, but that requires trucks and it requires fuel. And he the his Achilles heel was that, because the farther he would drive into Libya and then into Egypt, the less fuel he had. So this was an example of what was happening, and doesn't get a lot of press. A lot of people talk too much about tactics in warfare and not about logistics. And finally, on November 30th, 1942, a very famous naval battle happened near Guadalcanal. It was called the Battle of Tassafaronga, and that had the name of a point that was a very strategic point in Guadalcanal because you had the U.S. Marines. Initially, later on, the Army took over, but the First Division, the Marines were there first and did most of the bulk of the fighting. They had invaded Guadalcanal and they had captured the airfield that was being built by the Japanese, and they were hanging on for dear life ever since. And of course, there was 4 or 5 major sea battles that happened, and usually at night. At this time, the American Navy's radar capabilities weren't that good yet. The Japanese had a clear, distinct advantage in nighttime tactics. Their long lance torpedoes were the best torpedoes in the war. They had such good range. They could hit targets from 20,000 yards away. In this case, the Americans cruisers were up against destroyers. You would think that based on that, the cruisers should be able to handle destroyers pretty easily, but they were against one of the best admirals that the Japanese had, Admiral Tanaka. He was a destroyer captain, and he was commanding this flotilla, and he decisively won that battle. Decisively. So damaged heavily, one cruiser was sunk, the other ones were damaged. But it's interesting too because this was a theme that happened in this battle of Guadalcanal. It was a tactical win for the Japanese. It was two naval battles where they clearly won the battle, but they weren't able to land more troops and more supplies, and that's where the Americans won because from a strategic point of view, it's all about soldiers and munitions and food supplies, and the Americans were able to build up their defenses and supply them more consistently and better than the Japanese could. The Americans did a much better job of interdicting and preventing the Japanese from being able to do that. And this is another example. Japanese won a tactical victory, but they weren't, they weren't able to land the troops they were escorting, and the desperately needed supplies. So that's what happened on November 30th, from 39 till 45. I want to thank you for being here, and I can't wait to drop another video tomorrow.